Hi guys, I've been wanting a box joint jig for some time now. I got a project coming up where I can use one, so it's a good time to get one in. I tried a couple designs. I did one like this. Used as a reference point and a template. It worked alright, it was a little bit too finicky for me, so I moved on. I tried a design like this. Built a little bit like the Incra box joint. Again, it worked okay, it's a little bit flimsy, and even though it's a rather simple build, it's very tricky to get everything nice and square. So I moved on. And I decided at this point I was going to do a tried and true proven box joint jig, and I chose John Heisz box joint jig. I bought the plans and built it, and so far so good. If you guys would like to buy these plans, you can find them at his website, Ibuildit.ca. There's a link in the description below if you want to follow along this build. I do want to warn, if you have stuff cut down at the home center, make sure you have it cut a little bit bigger than you need so that you can square it up on your own, because it's never exactly right. Their saws aren't as in tune as what we have here in our workshop. So I'm going to run this through the table saw and square it up real nice. Now that I got my plywood squared up, I'm going to use the table saw, and based off of the parts diagram, I'm going to cut everything to the proper width. Several parts of this jig need a big rabbet in the back to accept the threaded rod, and to do that I'm going to use the table saw with one cut this way and one this way. But I need to make sure that I don't use the setting on my fence, because that's to this side of the blade. I need to make sure I measure to the outside of the blade, so I'm going to do that with a tape measure and a square for depth. Now that I got all the parts cut to the proper width, I need to cut down this threaded rod to glue into the indexing part so that I can move on to some other stuff and let this dry. I'm going to glue the threaded rod into place using some oil-based polyurethane construction adhesive. You could use epoxy for this if you wanted to, but this stuff is pretty much downright evil adhesion, so I like it. It is a little slimy or creamy depending on how you want to look at it. I do want to make sure I have a nice thread right on the end so I can get full use out of this carriage. I had a little bit of tear out on some of the ends of my board, so before I start assembling it, I'm going to use my sanding block and some 220 paper just to get a little bit of those hairs off. I have a slight bow in this bottom board, so I'm going to leave it clamped up for probably half an hour before adding this next piece, which goes right in here. While glue is drying, I'm going to take part B and cut some handholds into it based off the template. I'm going to use my drill press and a 1-inch Forstner bit to start the handles for part B, but you can absolutely use a drill and a spade bit if you don't have these. The base frame has been drying long enough now that I can unclamp the base and put in part D up flush against the part E here. Before you glue all this on, you want to put part B on top here and make sure that this is a perfectly flush joint. I did have to run part C through the table saw a couple times to get this as good as I possibly could, and then I'll touch it up with some sandpaper once it's all together. I'm going to use some hardwood to make the locking and hinge mechanism for this jig. This is hickory. I'm making sure everything's flush on the sides of the jig. I'm going to put the locking bar in place, make sure I have a thread, and that's where I'm going to put my 2 screws in, and a little bit of glue under here as well. Now the assembly of the jig is done. It's time to set it up with regard to your miter slots on your table saw. So I have the jig to the start position, which is as far over on this thread as you can possibly get. Now I'm going to put the jig up against the table saw blade with it unplugged, and I'm going to sneak the fence up. And while I'm tapping it over, I'm going to be spinning the blade until I get a little bit of contact there, and that's my home position. I'm going to lock the fence in place. Now I can back this up and I know I'm going to be in the same spot. So after a few trial runs, mostly dialing the width of my dado stack, I could finally say that I have a box joint jig that will give me reliable and repeatable cuts, and I am super excited to have this. There are a couple things that I would like to add to this jig at some point in time. The first one being a sticky tape measure to the top here, so I have a visual representation of where I am in the cut sequence. I have already built this small clamping mechanism that you can clamp onto your fence and then hold very small pieces without getting your fingers anywhere near the blade, because I am interested in cutting 8-inch box joint. So if you guys would like to build this jig, you can find John's plans over at his website. There's a link to that in the description below. Highly recommend it. From what I can tell so far, this is a great design, very solidly built, and very accurate and repeatable. If you guys have any questions about this build or any of my other builds on the channel, please leave them in the comments down below. Hammer that thumbs up button, it helps us out a lot and gets this video in front of more eyes. I'm DIYTyler. You guys have a good one.